Ma'am, since you are a professor of philosophy at Delhi University and this is your field, so I'll be asking questions about philosophy of poetry and aesthetics. With your permission, I would like to ask the first question.
Yes.
Thank you. Ma'am, my first question is that philosophy usually searches for truth through logic, through concepts, while poetry searches for truth from emotions, from imaginations, from metaphors. So, according to you, do these two different lines give the one answer, takes us to the one truth, or they both leads us to different truths, different realities?
Here we have to address three different areas.
Hmm.
One is philosophy in a more conservative framework, where what we call classical metaphysics, classical epistemology, and analytic philosophy, philosophy of language in the analytic tradition. So there, you see, when they deal with the question of truth, they deal with the propositions, because it's propositions that have the property of being true. And there they deal with different theories. The dominant theories of truth are theory of correspondence, that truth is the correspondence between a proposition and a fact. And alternative theories like, okay, correspondence doesn't work, so truth has to be pragmatics. And another theory within that classical framework is, a theory of coherence. Coherence of propositions. It doesn't talk about correspondence between propositions and facts.
Got
But still, within this framework, you see, they cannot go beyond propositions. Now, the second field is, there is a more a wider field of continental philosophy, where and also philosophy of aesthetics, because philosophy of poetry, philosophy of art, philosophy of aesthetics, these are also very kind of dominant areas within philosophy. And in continental philosophy, we have so many works of Heidegger on theory of art and many other philosophers. Even Wittgenstein's Tractatus, which is taken to be a hardcore analytic philosophy,
Hmm.
here there he talks, though very peripherally and very briefly, touches upon ethics and aesthetics being unsayable, with ineffable.
Oh.
And they give explanations that why language, kind of bumps it into something which cannot be said in language. So they give arguments on that. So that is the second region. And the third region is poetry itself. Poetry itself, the practice of poetry, the practice of art, which is not a theory of poetry. Poetry and theory of poetry, whether philosophy of poetry or whether literary theory of poetry, which literature students learn,
Yeah.
that is not poetry. So there you see, if we try to answer the question from that third field, then you see truth will not be uh, truth will be something which is enacted. Now, in the second field, that is the field which talks about uh, poetry or art or aesthetics being unsayable,
Hmm.
they do not do poetry. Still, they are using propositions. They are using lots of theories. They're using propositions in order to say that, ultimately poetry cannot be captured in proposition. But to say that, they're using pages and pages of theories and theses and articles and books. They are not doing poetry. Philosophy of poetry and theory of poetry, they are not doing poetry. They are explaining that why it is unsayable, but they are saying it in terms of proposition. It is only poetry or the practice of poetry which has to enact poetry through saying more and say where the unsayable gets embedded.
Okay, ma'am.
I can talk a little bit, if you wish, I can talk a little bit to illustrate more about why, poetry becomes poetry or poetic appreciation ultimately becomes unsayable. This is because you see, I mean, very simply to say, I mean, not going into many examples,
Hmm.
that poetic appreciation needs, is in poetry, the mechanism poetry is a fusion of word and meaning. And I mean, to take one example, the example which actually Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, has given in a particular essay called Fact and Truth. Fact and Truth.
Yeah, I read.
There he says that by truth, by truth, it means the truth of fine arts, the truth of poetry. And there he says that truth is unsayable. Why? Because very simple reason is this, that because poetry consists in the fusion of word and meaning. For example, he illustrates that particular very well-known poem by Keats, that is Ode to the Grecian Urn. There he says that, I mean, all the people, the students of literature, the scholars of literature, they know about this, that it is written in a particular format which is called iambic pentameter, and that consists in, juxtaposition of stressed syllable with unstressed syllable, and also alliterations. Alliterations both of the wire and the consonant. As a result, in the body of the poetry, the format of the poetry, they capture the reminiscence of the past, as if the live stream of thought through that, you know, that juxtaposition of stressed syllable with unstressed syllable and with alliterations. That that agonistic development of thoughts, uh, that gets actually embodied in the body of poetry. So there you cannot separate between the between language and the meaning. So they get seamlessly blended together. Now the thing is that there are so many theories about, okay, how the iambic pentameter work, what is exactly alliterations, but you can have lots and lots of propositions on what alliterations are. You can have lots and lots of propositions of what iambic pentameter is, but these propositions or these mechanisms, they won't be ultimately able to capture that rasa of poetic appreciation. Because again, I repeat that very simple point, that to talk about the fusion between word and meaning, you have to use that mechanism of fusion itself. So you, I mean, like for example, we cannot touch our fingertip with our fingertip, right? Because it cannot be, the fingertip cannot be externalized from itself and be able to touch it. So this is very simple reason, that because any proposition about that fusion between word and meaning has to use that mechanism fusion itself. So therefore it cannot talk about it. It cannot externalize the subject matter and talk about it. It has to embody it. It has to internalize it within its body. So poetry, the magic of poetic appreciation gets embodied, embedded, gets internalized in the body of poetry itself. So ultimately, that is by philosophy of poetry, that cannot propositionalize the poetic sentiment in the long run. Yeah, so this is, and I think that, the question of any conflict or any divergence between poetry and philosophy, it is not so important, because I think that, yeah, because you see that but this thing is clear. See, academic philosophy, the kind of philosophy that is being taught in the university departments, that does not do philosophy. So far as you are using formulations, so far as using propositions about poetic appreciation, you are using propositions about debating, your propositions about dialogues, uh, you know, where you really are not breaking up. You're not breaking up your theory into practice. You're still in the theory. I mean, you are theorizing about practice. You're theorizing about how theory breaks into practice, but you are not practicing. In the long run, you see, academic philosophy does not break into practice. But at the same time, I think that there is no divergence, because nowadays, if you look upon NEP in the positive light, I think people criticize NEP in many ways. But if you are optimistic, and if you look upon it in a positive light, you can look upon the skill-based courses. That is the term they have used. I was just thinking when I was preparing myself to have this dialogue with you, that we can have some kind of parallel course, practical, about how to do philosophy through poetry writing, through poetic appreciation, through debates, through dialogues, through social work, where we don't teach any propositions, but we do.
Oh. I remember one of my mates, my study mates used to say that philosophy is not something which should be studied or which should be put into syllabus. It should be done. So and I'm getting it that now.
I think these two are complementary. You have to learn it through propositions, then break the propositions in practice. Again, sometimes practice to make it more efficacious. You have to recoil back into propositions again to break into practice. I think let this kind of parallel activities go on. We cannot do away with theory. We cannot do away with practice.
So it means that we should have both on a parallel line going hand by hand, right?
I think so. I think so. I think so.